Hello, I'm here, finally. I'm here, finally, and echoing. Sorry about that. Anybody watching this, can you give me a affirmation in the chat that you can hear me? I'm just going to go ahead and get started because I'm pretty sure there's no one watching this right now. I hope that we get, oh no, there's 8 people. Okay, good. Hi, everybody. All right. I just had a little bit of a technical difficulty. It seems to be working now. I would really appreciate it if, good. Thank you, Paul, for letting me know. Okay, cool. So, hi, everybody. Good morning. My name is Tyler Norman. I'm the new Director of Community Rights US. I want to start by expressing gratitude to Vivian. That was a really great session. It's really nice in the morning to get stretching and moving, and I know I enjoyed it. So thank you very much. And I'm also really excited about who we have lined up next. After my session is over, a good friend, Jenka Soderberg from KBOO Radio in Portland, is going to be giving a talk about union organizing within the context of a nonprofit, which is a very interesting, sort of nuanced conversation, and lots of interesting insights will come out of that. Then we also have some more music lined up afterwards, as well as a conversation between Paul Cienfuegos, the founder of Community Rights US, and Will Falk from the group that's trying to stop the lithium mine in Thacker Pass, Nevada. And we've got a whole full day full of material for you all again. So I hope that folks will join us, will stick with us, watch all of this great material. I hope that you all will make some donations because this is a fundraiser for Community Rights US. And also, I hope that you all will ask me some questions. So this session, I'm just going to keep the chat box open. I'm going to respond to any questions you all might have about the community rights movement or rights of nature, anything along those lines. I also have a lot of experience with things like nonviolent direct action and other types of community organizing outside of the community rights framework itself. Anything that has to do with protecting nature, workers' rights. You know, it's May Day. Happy May Day, everyone. It's a really special, important day. May Day is my favorite day of the whole year. And I'm also going to be showing some art. So I will be checking the chat, and if you all send me questions, I will reply to them. But in the meantime, before the questions come, I would like to share some artwork made by myself and many others working in collaboration as part of a group called Beehive Collective. And we'll also just be doing the fundraising pitch here and there. So just to give you a heads up, it's a little bit difficult for me to show you all the poster and to see the chat and the donations that are coming in at the same time. So I might be a little bit delayed on responses, but I'll just be switching over and checking those every few minutes. So please put any questions you have in the chat. Let's see, I'm just going to put that in there again. I'm just going to put these notes here in the chat just to remind everyone of what we're doing. And then I'm going to switch over to show the true cost of coal. You're also welcome to ask me questions about this poster. I'd be happy to, custom tailor the storytelling to what your interests are. Can you all see this image? Can somebody give me an affirmation in the chat that you can see this image here that I've brought up on the screen? I have the live stream paused on my end, so I can't see what you all are seeing. I just want to make sure. Great. Thank you, Paul. All right, so Now, I'm minimizing the chat just so that I can see what I'm doing here. And this is a digital version of a paper poster produced by the Beehive Collective. You can see the title of it is here in the center. It's called The True Cost of Coal. And this was made by 11 different people working collaboratively. Over the course of about 2.5 years it took us to make this thing. And we started with in-depth first-person research. So this graphic is all about mountaintop removal coal mining and fossil fuel use in the US more generally. We wanted to travel to the regions where people are affected by these issues the most and to hear their stories. And we did just that, traveling throughout the Central Appalachian Mountains in the coal fields region, learning about the history, learning about the modern situation, collecting hundreds of stories from hundreds of people, and taking all of those stories and merging them together through this sort of collaborative storytelling. So we heard stories and then we retold those stories to each other over and over again until we had drawn out this sort of bigger picture. And for those of you who are not from Central Appalachia, for those of you who don't particularly care about that landscape or coal in general, I also just want to make the point that with our Beehive Collective graphics, one of the things that we try to do is we try to take stories that come from specific places and specific people so that they're very grounded in reality. And then, but then we also choose stories that are just the most extreme examples of something that's happening all over the world. So mountaintop removal coal mining is an extreme form of extraction. But the effects that it has on the ecosystems and on the communities around them are not really very different from what we see in places where there's oil extraction or natural gas extraction, fracking especially. I often use this graphic to tell stories about fracking, other forms of mining. In my home region of Wisconsin, this sort of upper Midwest region, especially around Lake Superior, there's a lot of metal mining that's happening. And one of the things that's awesome about telling stories with pictures is that when you write a story in a book, the words are fixed on the page and they never change ever again. But when you tell stories with pictures, you can adapt it and alter it and adjust it to the needs of the audience. So I wonder if you all can see this little hand marker, my little cursor on the screen. I'm going to very quickly run through the 5 chapters that make up the true cost of coal, and then I will check the chat to see if you have any questions, and if there's no questions yet, I'll come back and we'll look at the details in this graphic. I know it's hard to see if you have a small computer screen because there are so many details. Remember, there are hundreds of stories encoded in this graphic, so we're not even going to cover all of them in 1 hour, but I'll point out some of my favorite stuff. But to get us started, it's very important to understand how this story is told. The true cost of coal is designed to be read like a scroll from left to right. And it goes through a series of 5 chapters. Chapter 1 is here, this tall, narrow section on the far left side. Chapter 1 is called The Stories of the Land. This is where we look at the rich history of the Appalachian Mountains. Down in the lower part, we see, let me zoom in a little so you can actually see this. Down in the foreground of Chapter 1, we see the fossils that made up coal. We also see the modern day plants that still exist today, the ancestors of the plants that made coal. And I can tell a really fascinating story about the formation of coal if there's any science nerds out there, but if you don't want to get into that, I'll save it for another time. Up here, we see traditional ways that people were living on the land before Chapter 2. Chapter 2 is here. And chapter 2 is all about colonization and the Industrial Revolution and the huge changes that happened when people started mining coal in the Americas and all over the world. We look at the history of displacement of indigenous peoples. We also look at the history of the coal mining towns, the so-called company towns, and the vibrant history of union struggles where the workers stood up for each other and fought back against the oppressive bosses who were taking advantage of them and in some cases killing them and keeping them in this sort of debt slavery. So even as we look at the many bad things that have happened in our history, we also celebrate the positive. Chapter 3 is double wide. It's the whole middle section is chapter 3. And this is where we look at, what is mountaintop removal? How does it work? Where is all this coal going? Up here in the background, you see this greater system of consumption and production and eventual just disposal of trash. Everything is built to break nowadays, so we always need more. In the foreground, we see how communities and water and ecosystems are affected. This is one of my favorite scenes, so I'll come back to this later. Chapter 4, second to the last, on the right side, these are the stories of resistance. We look at many different ways that communities are fighting back to protect their land and their water and their health, and everything from petitions to organizing protests to gathering their community around to celebrate their culture. There are outsider activists who are parachuting in, and up at the top we look at some of the big institutions, who it is that we're fighting against to try to make these changes that are necessary. And then chapter 5 is the stories of regeneration. These are all the things that people are doing to try to create a brighter future, to create sustainable local economies and really healthy, strong communities. We have a scene of 7 generations of women salamanders in the foreground. This sort of sets the theme of chapter 5. They are teaching and learning about locally relevant knowledge. Like this expectant mother who's learning from the great-grandmother about medicinal herbs used for women's health. There's an adolescent age salamander, sort of a awkward teenager salamander. Salamanders, when they're teenagers, instead of having pimples, they have these weird gills on the outside of their head, and it's like very embarrassing for them. But good thing we were able to convince her to show up with her grandma. They are planting bioremediating plants that clean up the water and the soil. You can see that the stuff that was dirty over here has been made fresh and clean again. And so this new mother is bathing her baby, showing how water is a source of life. It's the source of all life. And there's a middle-aged salamander who's weaving a tapestry that connects all of them and continues on into the future. So I gave a little bit of extra words to that particular story just to give you all an example of what kind of content is in here. I'm just going to check the chat to see if anyone has asked any questions. Thanks for the compliment, Paul. I will say again, just to encourage everyone to put any questions you might have about Community Rights US or the Community Rights Movement or Rights of Nature into the chat. I'm happy to answer them. I would love this session to be participatory and a responsive thing from me to you all. But in the meantime, until we get some questions, I'll continue looking at the true cost of coal. Where to start? Let's see. Let's just zoom in so you all can actually see some of these details, and we'll talk about what mountaintop removal is. So here, this gives us the gist of it. I'm going to spend a fair bit of time on this section because there's a lot of details here. It's right in the center of the graphic, which means it's where we want everyone to start. It's sort of like, this is our version of the headlines on a news article. This is the most important stuff, and we sort of work our way out, spiraling outward from there. So in the center, we see this giant machine. This thing is called a drag line. It looks like a crane, right? But a drag line is more than any old crane. The largest drag lines are 30 stories tall, 300 feet tall, right? And the buckets on these things are big enough to hold 3 Greyhound buses in them. They're moving that much earth with every swipe. And so we show it here that the drag line is tearing through this mountain community because the coal company owners don't really care about the people who live in that region. Mountaintop removal is exactly what it sounds like. They are using enormous amounts of explosives to blow up entire mountains. And they use these drag lines to shovel the debris into the valleys in between the mountains. So in Appalachia, they're not big mountains. If you haven't been there, people who come from the Rockies or who come from the Andes or the Himalayas, I mean, the Appalachian Mountains probably look like dinky little hills. They're not steep, craggy peaks. They're small mountains because they're very ancient. They've been worn down over many, many millions of years. And they're just jam-packed full of these dense, lush forests. It's actually the most biodiverse temperate hardwood forest in the world is in Central Appalachia. There are more species of salamanders in the Central Appalachian Mountains than there are in the Amazon rainforest. I mean, it is a really, really special place. And it's also special because it's full of coal. Do you see these black layers that are in the mountainsides here? Coal forms it did form in a sedimentary process that makes it so that there are thin layers of coal between thick layers of sandstone or other types of sedimentary bedrock. And sometimes they call them seams of coal. Sometimes a seam of coal is as little as 1 foot thick and under hundreds of feet of bedrock. Now, when the seams of coal are 3 feet thick or 6 feet thick or 10 feet thick, it's very easy for underground mining to happen. But when they're only 1 foot thick, you can't really get a person down there to mine that. But these coal companies have decided all the easy stuff, all the really good coal is gone, and they're just so greedy for every last little bit that they are willing to, as I said, I don't even know how to describe it in words. If you're not familiar with this, you should look up some photos because it's just stunning. You can look at Google Maps and just look at West Virginia on Google Maps, and you only have to zoom in a few clicks before you start to see these giant gray patches. Some of these mines are like miles long, and mountaintop removal has been happening at such an extremely fast rate that by now it's over 450 named mountains, like places you can find on a map. They're gone forever. And over 4,000 miles of valleys and streams have been filled in. This is called a valley fill. This is what they do with all the excess rock that they don't want. And this is what's the really most damaging part about mountaintop removal. Because the valleys, the streams are where all the life is. That's where all the abundance is. And when these streams get buried, not only is all this land destroyed, but everything downstream from it gets polluted with things like arsenic and mercury and lead and cadmium. All of these nasty heavy metals are in coal. And in fact, coal has been protecting all of us from these nasty things by keeping it bound tightly underground. And this type of mining is just releasing it back into the environment, back into these streams that are very sensitive and full of endangered species and things of that nature. And you also end up with, over here, we see an enormous amount of polluted water in this sludge impoundment. I'm not going to go into great detail about this, but if anyone wants to know, you can ask a question. It's a whole other long story. Up at the top, I'll point out just very briefly, there's two other elements of the greater system that facilitate mountaintop removal happening. Because in Appalachia, these coal companies, they say, well, you know what, people, actually, by destroying your mountains, we're doing you a favor. Because the reason that Appalachians are so poor, it's not because us coal companies have been screwing you over for over like 150 years. The reason that you're so poor is because you have too many damn mountains in the way, and it's impossible to develop things like Walmarts. But now that we made this new flat land, you know, we took down the top of the mountain and we filled in the valley until it's all just a flattened, lifeless moonscape. Well, guess what? That's perfect for building a new Walmart. And you notice that the Walmart we depicted just like the company store. That's another side story I can get into if you all ask me. But we also see the Walmart, it's shoving off all of these local mom and pop shops, destroying the local economy even further, as if the coal companies hadn't destroyed it enough as is. You know, Central Appalachia has one of the highest unemployment rates in the entire United States because of this sort of boom and bust style of doing things. This very sort of colonial, you know, it's still a resource extraction colony in that part of the world. We also see that besides Walmarts, the second most common thing that gets developed on old mountaintop removal sites are private prisons. And here we have an opportunity to reference many of the things that are terrible about the prison system here in the United States. There's a sewing machine in here because prisoners in the United States are forced to work for like $1 a day and things of that nature. You know, it's a continuation of the slavery system under another name. If you all are not already familiar with this story of you know, how mass incarceration has developed in this country, I recommend watching a movie called 13th, as in the 13th Amendment, which is also, the 13th and 14th Amendments are very, very relevant to the community rights movement, and because they've been, you know, manipulated to help provide corporate personhood and corporate rights. But we can get into that later. We see that this bulldozer that's towing in the prison is also shoving off this public school. One of the tactics that the coal industry is using in Central Appalachia is that they're depopulating the entire area by making life unlivable for people. You know, basically, in places like West Virginia, they still to this day, they call the coal industry, they call it King Coal because it rules everything, it owns everything, including government at all levels. And so things like public schools are being shut down, community centers are being shut down, all of the local shops have gone out of business. You know, there's a mass exodus out of Central Appalachia since the 1970s or 80s. And, you know, it's just yet another example of how our capitalist, colonialist system just chews people up and spits them out when they're no longer profitable. And it chews up ecosystems and land and water and makes it all into trash. I'm just checking the chat. Yes, I see a question. Paul asked a question. Corporations actually make the claim regarding the flat land. Maybe they don't use those exact words. I was adding a little bit of, you know, dramatic flair to it. But yes, they totally do. In fact, here, if we zoom out just a little bit, you see there's the Walmart. There's also there's the private prison. And then we also have a golf course over here. And I have seen coal industry literature like propaganda that is just boasting about how awesome these newly developed, sites are for Walmarts, private prisons, and golf courses. Those are the top 3 things that get built on mountaintop removal sites. And I want to ask all of you to think about this. Walmart, private prison, and golf course. Does that sound like a good recipe for a sustainable local economy? I don't think so, right? It's actually, this is just another example of the people and the lands of Appalachia being extracted, the energy and the life being extracted out of it to make profit for people who don't even live there. All right, what else? What should I show next? Maybe we'll look at this section. So here we see how communities are affected by mountaintop removal coal mining. There's a lot of pollution happening here. All around it we see that there's massive amounts of erosion because when these companies remove the trees and the topsoil off of the mountains, there's nothing to catch the water anymore. And Central Appalachia, it's very nearly a rainforest ecosystem. It is very, very wet there. It's incredible. If you've never been there, I highly encourage you to visit and get out into the wilderness and just be out in these little tiny hollows where water just gushes out of the side of the hills constantly. It's like the whole landscape is just filled with water. Beautiful. It's incredible. But when that water gets polluted, like here, we see that these little insects, these little larval insects, what we would call microfauna. This is a mayfly larva. This is a mosquito larva, caddisfly. I think this one's a black fly. They are dying because of this sedimentation. They need the water to be clean and clear. And these little guys are the base of the food web, right? So we see pollution happening, we see flooding happening as a result of the erosion. And then up here, this family of frogs represents what it's like for those who work in the mines. I'll start with Mama Frog here. She's gardening. Her tomato plants are all blighted because look, the groundwater's polluted. Mountaintop removal is causing so much pollution that even the water underground is becoming toxic. And I've spoken with people who literally their tap water comes out black or red or foul smelling. And notice that this gardener frog, she has a scar on her side because maybe she had her gallbladder removed because of heavy metal accumulation. One of the towns that we went to on our research trip, Prenter, West Virginia. In Prenter, West Virginia, 90% of the adult population has had their gallbladders removed. And cancer rates are sky high. And now people get their water trucked in because they can't even bathe in the well water. Frog Minor here, this is all the same frog going through a cycle that we call the dance of hard choices. So Frog Minor here is detonating those explosives and getting a paycheck in return. Notice how the paycheck is on the end of a fishing line. And these two coal trucks representing the industry, one of them, this is sort of like the carrot and the stick. One of them is wearing a Santa Claus hat and is bringing all these gifts of economic prosperity. And the other one is looking all menacing and saying, don't mess with us, otherwise we'll take all of this away from you, and then you'll be sorry. So, folks in that region feel like they don't really have a choice. Like coal mining is really the only option, in order to have enough money to send their kids to college so they can do something else, for example. So Frog Miner in step 2 comes home and has some pain in its back, got hurt on the job, because even though the mining is highly mechanized now, it's still very dangerous. And the little tadpole is pouring this black water out of the tap. So in step 3, Frog Miner goes to the doctor, who's a highly well-endorsed pharmaceutical jackass, and Frog Miner hands over all this money because, you know, they're paying out of pocket because they no longer have the unions to fight for them. They no longer have things like health care. You know, wages have stagnated since the 70s, and it costs an enormous amount of money for highly addictive prescription painkillers. Central Appalachia is one of the worst areas for the opioid epidemic. And of course, here's the bottled water with a price tag on it. So in step 4, Frog Miner has only one little coin left, so it puts its hard hat back on and heads back to work, stuck in this cycle forever. While the little one, who's growing up now, is considering, well, should I continue in this path that my family's been in for generations, or should I take this other path that leads to the bus stop out of town, like so many others? Over here, we have one little caterpillar is saying, hey buddy, hey look, there's this other path. Not many people tread on it. There's not very many footprints on it yet, but you can also choose to join us. We are standing up for our community. We're standing up for our land. We are, you know, here they're doing a demonstration, the petitions, all that sort of stuff. And here, I'll just say this scene briefly. This is also one of my favorites right here. This is, you know, the basic community organizing that is necessary to build our people power from the grassroots up. So all these animals are gathered together to discuss their strategy of how to work together to change the world. They're, you know, making some plans and some maps. They're surrounded by books because they're learning from their elders. They're looking at a watershed map. They're seeing how all of us are connected to each other based on the land that we live on. And it doesn't matter what county or township or state we're in. We're all connected by our watershed and by our planet. You'll notice that they're singing, sharing their culture. This bat with its big ears is reminding all of us how important it is to listen. And this empty chair reminds all of us that there's room yet for you to join too. All the animals who are in this scene are endangered species to represent the people who are affected by these issues the most, being at the forefront of making decisions. A lot of the messaging within the Beehive Collective has always been the same type of messaging that I find so attractive about Community Rights US. We too saw our work as educating people to fight back against corporate rule and to challenge and overcome our systems of colonization, especially the colonization that's internal inside of our minds. Great, I have another question here. How does your group find such incredible artists? What's your process? Well, we take a really long time to do things, and our process, has been, a lot of trial and error. Collaborative work is really, really challenging, but it's also an incredible, it provides incredible opportunities for growth. And learning from each other and really pushing ourselves to get outside of the box. Some of the folks, there were two, well, okay, let me back up. Let me say that the way that we make these things, it's more similar to the way a comic book is made, where there's like a pencil artist, and then an inker, and then a colorist, and then someone does the text. Oh, and by the way, there's also a writer who just writes the story before any drawing happens at all. That's very similar to the way that we make this. There were two people who did all of the final ink and graphite on this thing. And one of them was a tattoo artist, and the other was a trained scientific illustrator. She did field guide illustrations. So we did find some really talented folks, and let me tell you, it's really difficult to find talented professional artists who are willing to work for free. So, that's also part of the reason that our group has only made a few of these, and nowadays the Beehive Collective isn't really a thing anymore, but some of us who consider ourselves pollinators, we continue to just spread the work around. It just occurred to me that I forgot a really, really important part of this. I'm going to say one more thing about this image, and then I'm going to show our fundraising video, but it just occurred to me, let's see, I want to show something over here. I forgot to tell you all about why we do all of our things with animals. So we do fable-style storytelling, which means we use these symbolic animal characters, but we're talking about real-life environmental and social justice issues. So there's many different reasons why we choose to do that. Like, for example, these paper wasps, they're all living and working cooperatively to show like a housing co-op, a workers co-op, an idea of how we can reduce our consumption while also increasing our power, our people power, and our ability to get things done. It doesn't have to be, it doesn't necessarily have to be a trade-off. Like we don't have to limit ourselves by consuming less. We just have to do things differently and do it together. And that's how paper wasps do things. And we chose them because they live in these, these dense settings, kind of like an apartment building or something like that. But we also chose them because they have a really great benefit on the ecosystem. They serve a decomposer role in a way because they make these paper wasps out of dead wood. They find these dead, rotten logs, and they chew them up, and then they bring them home, and the chewed up bits, and that's what they make into the paper. And here we see a bee is harvesting medicinal mushrooms to make tinctures. Here we see a bicycle-powered, what do you call it? FM radio transmitter. This possum here is the DJ hanging upside down from the tree, recording the music that's coming out of this jam band, who are once again celebrating the music of Appalachia, which has been so influential on the entirety of music in the United States. Right, I'm sort of just rambling with this stuff, but I hope you all are enjoying it. I'm going to just take a 2-minute break to show our fundraising video. I want to remind you all that this is a fundraising event. If you like what you're seeing on the stream so far, please click the link below and make a small donation. Any amount really helps. If you like the work of Community Rights US, we need your support in order to do it more and do it bigger and better and harder and faster, because now is a really important moment for all of us to be standing up together, to be reaching out and connecting with our neighbors, and to be putting our foot down and saying no more to this abusive corporate rule. All right, I'll be back in 2 minutes.
Did you know it's illegal for local governments to pass laws that protect their communities from controversial corporate activities like oil pipelines, genetically modified crops, fracking, and clear-cut logging?
Did you know that corporations have more constitutionally protected rights than people do?
Enter the community rights movement.
Since 1999, 200 towns, cities, and counties in 9 states have passed locally enforceable laws that ban specific harmful corporate activities and put decision-making back in the hands of local people.
We want to bring this incredibly successful community-based strategy to every community in this country.
We've assembled an amazing network of people and organizations to provide communities with the support and training that they need to run successful community rights campaigns.
Our work transcends conventional single-issue activism. We think of it as a rights-based strategy, which allows progressives and conservatives to have a much easier time coming together to protect the health, safety, and welfare of residents and the local environment. Community rights lawmaking can protect our right to clean water and safe food, our right to free and fair elections, our right to living wage jobs, and our right to a renewable energy future.
But this movement is about more than just reclaiming our local lawmaking. It is also about catalyzing a profound culture shift.
Imagine the possibilities in your community if more and more of your neighbors and coworkers could envision themselves as taking an active role in the governance of their own communities.
We are, in fact, we the people. That is where our ultimate power and authority resides.
Your contribution will greatly expand the reach of the community rights movement.
Thank you for your support and for sharing our fundraising campaign with others.
Hi everybody. I hope you enjoyed that video. If I want to just say again, if you have any questions about Community Rights US or the Community Rights Movement, rights of nature, please put them in the chat. I'll be happy to answer them. At this point, I only have about 10 minutes left in my session. So until I see some questions, I'll just continue telling some stories from the true cost of coal. You all are welcome to ask questions about that as well. 10 minutes left, so if you have any questions, now's the time. All right, so we're back to looking at this graphic. I wish that I could say that there was a reference to community rights in here, but at the time that we made this graphic, we didn't yet know about the community rights movement. It's fairly new to me. I want to talk about this scene with the union organizing because it's very relevant to May Day. And as I've already said, May Day is my favorite day. I care a lot about the history of working class struggle, and even though the union movement is fairly corrupt and lackluster nowadays, back in the late 1800s, early 1900s, it was incredibly inspiring. So up here we have references to colonization. I'm not going to spend time on those since time is so short. But you see that underneath the clear cut, we have this company town. Let me zoom in a little more. This has small details on it. So this company town this was the model for coal mining communities. And it was literally based on feudalism. So the boss, the company owner, was the lord. And the boss owned everything. The boss owned the church, and the boss owned the preacher who would tell the miners how to act right every Sunday morning. The boss owned the company store. So anything that the miners needed to buy, their clothes, their food, their tools to work in the mine, they had to pay their own wages back to their own boss. And because they were given money in like special company credit called company scrip, it wasn't US dollars, it was this special company money that you could only spend in one place, which was the company store. And so prices were inflated enormously, and it was very, very common for the miners who lived in these tiny little shacks but paid enormous amounts of rent back to their boss. They were chained with these $ chains because they were stuck in these cycles of debt. It was a very, very common story for miners in Appalachia, for miners all over the United States at that time. It would be like no matter how hard they worked, no matter how much coal they pulled out of the ground, every single week they would add up their pay and they would add up their debits back to the boss, and every single week they would be further and further in debt. And those debts would be passed on to their children. So that it was essentially a different form of slavery, and it was extremely difficult for people to get out of these communities because they were also really isolated. And you can't just I mean, it's difficult. It's very, very difficult to get out of a place when there's no public transit and you have no money. And if people started to revolt against that, the boss also owned these mercenary security guards who the miners called gun thugs. And it's pretty obvious what role they served. Meanwhile, the boss also owns all of the coal. And so you see the coal is on this train headed out of town. It was a really common story that coal mining communities, which were responsible for electrifying the nation, didn't have electricity in their own homes. I met someone once who told me that her grandmother's town in eastern Kentucky didn't get electricity until 1980. They were mining coal since 1880, but they didn't get electricity in their town until 1980. Isn't that incredible? And so here we see the miners, they are rising up and they're revolting and they're flying a flag that says solidarity forever. Some of them are carrying guns. This is a reference, well, you see here what's happening to these striking miners are being attacked by the gun thugs. And so the miners fought back. There's actually a really important part of US history called the Mine Wars era. In the 1920s and 1930s, there were pitched battles between miners and security gun thugs all over Appalachia, in southern Illinois, in Colorado. There's a famous one called the Ludlow Massacre. And below that scene, we see coal mining community members who are celebrating union victories like the 8-hour workday. Here they're getting medical, this medical symbol represents things like workers' compensation and health care and other sorts of things that, a lot of us here in this country today, we don't realize that our ancestors fought and died in some cases to win things like the minimum wage, things like the weekend, things like an end to child labor, occupational safety standards, like you go to work and you don't have to worry that you're going to die every single day. People literally laid their lives on the line to win those things for all of us. And so, while I may disagree with the practices of mining corporations nowadays, I have enormous respect for the miners themselves and their communities and their ancestry and their contributions to our culture. Here you can see they're doing a square dance. They got some moonshine. This song that's playing here is called "Which Side Are You On?" It's a famous Union song. Of course, this lightning bug is electrifying the dance floor, that miners' pride in bringing electricity. They've got a picnic, all sorts of stuff here. That's just getting started on how important union coal miners were to the overall union movement in this country. How are we doing on time? Oh, we are very near to the end. I'm going to answer this question from Paul, asking that they were unionized but then lost their unions later. They didn't lose the unions. The United Mine Workers of America are still around. The union is still there. The union has been totally broken and has no power to actually stand up for people any longer. And that history is very complex, and I don't know that I'm fully qualified to detail it. But yeah, at one point in the 40s and the 50s, especially when steel production was at its peak, which was due to war economy, and that's problematic in itself. But that was the peak for these mining communities. That was also the peak of the union movement in general in this country, and we saw. Oh, I just noticed another comment that I hadn't seen before. I'm going to put the Beehive Collective web address in here. So that's if you go to that link, you can see all of these pieces on digital forms of them, and you can download them, and they come with narrative booklets, so you can read along with the story. And you can print them out and you can reproduce these. Everything is anti-copyright, or technically it's called Creative Commons license, which means you are allowed to reproduce this work because it's meant for education, it's meant for movement building, it's not meant, for us to keep a tight control over it so we can make a profit. We want this stuff to spread as far and wide as possible. However, I don't think that you can get posters anymore. Some of us, like myself, still have a few posters left over, so if you really, 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 really want one, I might be able to get you one, but you'll have to contact me personally. You can no longer order them from the website. Look at this. The time went by so fast. I didn't even hardly get started on telling all of these stories. But so it goes. An hour is actually a very short time. I'm going to play that video, the fundraising video, one more time, and then after that video is over, we're going to switch over to our next guest, Jenka Soderberg. So I'll just say one more time, thanks to everyone for joining us. Thank you for donating. Please consider donating. Any amount is appreciated. And enjoy the rest of the show. We're on for most of the rest of the day, and there's a lot of great performers lined up. So we're excited to be doing this really fun event.
Did you know it's illegal for local governments to pass laws that protect their communities from controversial corporate activities like oil pipelines, genetically modified crops, fracking, and clear-cut logging?
Did you know that corporations have more constitutionally protected rights than people do?
Enter the community rights movement.
Since 1999, 200 towns, cities, and counties in 9 states have passed locally enforceable laws that ban specific harmful corporate activities and put decision-making back in the hands of local people.
We want to bring this incredibly successful community-based strategy to every community successful.
We've assembled an amazing network of people and organizations to provide communities with the support and training that they need to run successful community rights campaigns.
Our work transcends conventional single-issue activism. We think of it as a rights-based strategy, which allows progressives and conservatives to have a much easier time coming together to protect the health, safety, and welfare of residents and the local environment. Community rights lawmaking can protect our right to clean water and safe food, our right to free and fair elections, our right to living wage jobs, and our right to a renewable energy future.
But this movement is about more than just reclaiming our local lawmaking. It is also about catalyzing a profound culture shift.
Imagine the possibilities in your community if more and more of your neighbors and coworkers could envision themselves as taking an active role in the governance of their own communities.
We are, in fact, we the people. That is where our ultimate power and authority resides.
Your contribution will greatly expand the reach of the community rights movement.
Thank you for your support and for sharing our fundraising campaign with others.